Greetings, Atarians and Atariettes. It's Adam with Errata Non Grata. And thanks to Reaperman for admonishing me for not really playing much Mule on the Atari 8-bit PCs. Like I said, I have played it before, but it was many years ago, and I got it, I think, as a part of a collection of floppies that I came across at a thrift store. And as I recall, there was no manual or anything, and I guess I should have looked it up online and given it a proper playthrough, but that's not what today's video is about. It's actually about a new game that Atari just released to Steam called Balls of Steel. And Balls of Steel was a game, I think it was maybe DOS based, perhaps Windows 95, 98, somewhere around that. It came from the 90s, as the description here on the Steam store says. The balls are back. The legendary 90s pinball game Balls of Steel returns to PC in all of its radical retro glory. Play through 5 classic top-down pinball tables and 2 brand new tables in classic BOS style. Get 7 awesome retro tables in one package rebuilt to run on modern PC hardware. So let's watch the trailer. I never played this game back in the day, so I've played some virtual pinball machines, so I couldn't tell you how it lands on the scale of accuracy, but we're going to look at some reviews here in a moment. The tables have returned. Get it? It's like the tables have turned. So, as I'm recording this, I'm sitting in my arcade. I actually have a bunch of pinball machines right over there. They're not on right now because I just opened and there's nobody in the mall except for crying children. So, just to save power, I don't waste the electricity. But I guess I know a thing or two about pinball. I'm not a wizard by any means. I kind of suck at it. I've never been huge into virtual pinball just because if I can get access to the real thing, I'd much rather play the real thing. But there are some tables designed by like Zen Pinball, Pinball FX that are out there. I know Act Games has had some pinball, virtual pinball tables as well. Now I haven't really played those much either, but I know from reading other people's comments on them that they tend to be the gold standard of virtual pins. But again, I'm just always somewhat annoyed by... Why is this playing again? Somewhat annoyed by virtual pinball just because it's difficult to get the physics to be absolutely spot on with real physics. As try as they might. But you notice that the reviews for this are mixed. I was about to buy it, but then I noticed it said mixed reviews, and I decided to check them out. And even the ones that are giving it a thumbs up are saying that, are mentioning some problems. Apparently, there's some real problems with the controls on this. Now, that's bizarre to me because if you know pinball, pinball has some of the simplest controls in the gaming universe. It's just 2 buttons on the sides, and one on the left, one on the right. Now, yes, there are modern pinball machines that also have an action button in the center lock bar, which may be used for different things that can take place within the game. There have also been, throughout history, including some on rare occasion, a recent one, 2 buttons on each side. But it's nothing complicated, and so how they managed to get the controls screwed up on gamepad is really bizarre. Also, from the negative reviews, I mean, they get into this a little bit more, such as this one, which says the controls are not correct. The correct configs is they want you to play it with you finding out you use the triggers for the flippers. I mean, I guess the triggers for flippers make sense if you're playing it on a gamepad, but it's like both the triggers as well as the shoulder buttons should just automatically be mapped to that, I would think. If not, A and B as well. I mean, again, that's not difficult to do. This one mentions there's no cabinet mode. There's sparse options for video. It works on Steam Deck, but not completely like you might expect. And then they also mentioned it's not Zen Pinball or VPX or FP quality, any of that. Now, this was not developed by Atari. It was developed by a company called Big Boat Interactive. I guess we can take a look. I'm not familiar with them as to what they've done. Oh, they did an earlier version of Battlezone, huh? Or 98 Redux, which I've not played that from the time. I mean, they don't seem to have a huge repertoire of games, but hopefully they can go back and fix this, and then people will be happier with that. I guess I'd feel more comfortable if there wasn't some issues like that. But I guess the one thing that makes me 3 buttons for the flippers. But yeah, I mean, I guess everybody's complaining about the controls on a gamepad and not necessarily like a keyboard. So maybe the keyboard, it plays just fine, but I'm just going to, again, wait it out. Now, one thing that is odd to me, now, I guess this is more of an issue with people in Atari at large, is that for some reason, Atari themselves has never really given much of any attention to their own pinball history. And if you go over to the Internet Pinball Database, which is ipdb.org, type in Atari, search the database, then you will see that there were quite a few, I mean, not a ton, but there were some Atari-made pinball machines, like real physical pinball machines. Now, not all of these were released, such as 4x4. Bigfoot was Bigfoot started at Bally, I think it was, and then it ended up at Atari and was turned into Hercules, which is one of the largest mass production pinball machines ever made. I don't think Pipeline, Neutron Star, Roadrunner were released. Their first one, if I'm recalling correctly, and it looks like that's the case from here, is one called the Atarians. And if we zoom in on this, so this was released in the mid-70s. Now, Atari did do a slightly weird thing with their pinball machines, as a vast majority of pinball machines would put these red numerical LED counters to show the score on the back box. But Atari moved it from the back box so that they could just show some beautiful art. And that's the thing. All the Atari pinball machines have fantastic art. Most of them were designed by George Opperman, who is the principal artistic designer at Atari from the 70s, at least through, I think, 1984. He still might have worked there up to his death in 1986, although he might have been working more for the arcade side after Atari was sold to the Tramiels. I'm not 100% sure if he was working up until when he died. But his artwork was super influential on a lot of things at Atari. He's the guy who came up with the Fuji logo. But as I recall, I guess his credits would be on the game here, so I might as well take a look here. Yeah, art by George Opperman. But also, there's another name on this that you might also recognize if you're a classic gamer, Eugene Jarvis. So this was the very first game within the video game arcade space that Eugene Jarvis ever worked on. If you don't know that name, this is the guy who was part of creating Robotron 2084, Defender, Cruisin' USA, Narc. He currently runs an arcade company called Raw Thrills. His family is also involved in making wines, Jarvis Wines, but his main thing is creating games. But he worked at Atari for a time, and he started off on sound design, and that's one thing where Eugene's always been a big sound guy, and that started with pinball. But for some other ones that the company released, but they've ignored, and it's not just Atari that's ignored it, it seems like the fan base, like Atarians, don't really ever talk about pinball, the Atari-made pinball machines. And I think these could have been adapted in various ways into Atari video games. Like, I wrote a blog post years ago, and I think I did a video on this, talking about how Atari carts should have been designed, and they should have pulled influence from the artwork within the Atari-made pinball machines to develop worlds that, like the maps that you're driving in, instead of just weird generic things that they just came up with themselves in that game. But you could apply it to other stuff too. But let me take a look here. Let's see. Airborne Avenger. This one was kind of like a James Bondish sort of theme to it, where I guess you were playing this guy and you had your Bond girls of a sort. I guess I should show the playfield. And one thing that was also distinctive about Atari-made pinball machines, aside from putting those scoring things down here on what's called the apron of the game, was that they designed what were called wide bodies. And so if you were to put an Atari-made pinball machine next to a standard pinball machine, it's much wider. Now, this does create a different dynamic for how the game feels and how it plays. Generally, it's a little bit slower. Now, keep in mind, back in the 1970s, pinball design was very different from what it is today. You didn't have things like ramps. You didn't have toys on the playfield. You didn't have digital callouts. You didn't have dot matrix displays, anything like that. So all of the games that they designed are much simpler. Now, one thing that was a big criticism against Atari-made pinballs back in the day, and Eugene Jarvis even said this too, was that they were essentially crap. They were very unreliable. They broke down a lot. I used to own one. Let me find it here. Called Space Riders. And again, the artwork on this was just phenomenal. I loved how this game looked. And, you know, this is where something that could have easily been integrated into Atari carts, or they could have done a Space Riders video game where you're, riding a motorcycle in a futuristic city and fighting off bad guys and stuff. But the playfield was a little bit more complex, I guess, than the one that we just looked at, the Airborne Avenger. Now, I've come across an Airborne Avenger before. I've not owned one, but I played one before a long time ago. I ended up selling my Space Riders when somebody came along and said, hey, I'd love to have that in my collection. You want to sell it? And I was like, yeah, might as well, just because it was spending more time being broken than it was being up. So like in an arcade environment where it's on every day and being played every day, they tend to wear out a lot faster. But this one had 3 drop targets, and then these what they call Newton balls, where you hit the pinball. If you hit the pinball into them, it knocks this pinball into the target to get the points and stuff. But yeah, to me, what would make a game like Balls of Steel more compelling is to digitize these 1970s original Atari pinball designs. I mean, Atari SA, who is the company that releases the video games that I'm generally talking about here, they should still have the IP rights to these, unless they sold them off years ago. That maybe I'm not 100% clear on, because I've never seen these mentioned as a part of their IP lists, but maybe again it's just possible that somebody forgot that they had them. One thing that's interesting to note about Hercules, I think I mentioned how it was the largest pinball machine, mass-produced pinball machine ever. This did not use a regular pinball. It used a cue ball from a pool table inside of it, and so like the flippers were massive, the ball was massive, it was very loud. I've unfortunately not had the chance to come across this one, as it's fairly rare. As I recall, it was the last machine that Atari had also produced, and it was released, May 1979. So, yeah, just cool stuff, and I don't think you need to license Hercules for anything, since it's an ancient myth. But, okay, so yeah, Hercules was the last one from what I see here. These other ones like Monza, Neutron Star, or 4x4, they were never released. Now, one thing to also note about 4x4 is this originally started off as E.T., the extraterrestrial pinball, and so like these 4 targets were designed for like the 4 components of the phone. or something along those lines, but I've never seen any pictures of the ET design. I guess because of what happened with ET on the Atari 2600, that was dropped pretty quickly, and then they turned it into 4x4, but then that was dropped too. So didn't get very far. But one game that was a little bit more traditional in its design was Superman. Now, Superman was designed by a guy who's very, very well known within pinball circles, known as the King of Pinball, Steve Ritchie. And he designed this right before he left Atari, and he went over to Bally Midway, as I recall, or just might have just been Bally at the time. But he did a pretty cool looking design. This picture, unfortunately, is fairly terrible. But as you can see there, it was a little bit more interesting than perhaps some of them. But still, again, even without the Superman license, Atari had plenty of original designs that they created with pinball. And it's like, why not digitize these, put them into Balls of Steel? I mean, it's still cool that they have Centipede and Missile Command. I don't have any problems with that. I'm just thinking, it'd be great if there was a digital pinball collection of the Atari pinball machines, because at least on a virtual sense, it won't break down like the real thing will. And if you can get the artwork scanned in and made to be, very high definition, like 8K or something, then it would look fantastic. But let me know what you think about Balls of Steel if you've played it. Do you like it? Is it worth $9? Or am I right in being hesitant and waiting on it? I mean, I guess I don't really play too much with gamepads and on Steam, so maybe in that regard it should be fine. But it was also mentioned that its physics are not quite there like other virtual pinball machines are. But anyways, that's enough for this video. We'll catch you on the next one.